The silence in a house after a funeral is not an absence of sound. It is a presence. It is a heavy, suffocating weight that settles into the carpets and clings to the curtains like wood smoke. It feels like the house is holding its breath, waiting for a floorboard to creak under a weight that is no longer there. For 6 months, I have lived inside that breath. I have moved through these rooms like a ghost myself, careful not to disturb the layers of dust that have begun to settle on the things Elias left behind. Every night follows the same ritual. I retreat to my room, a space that has become a fortress of grief, and I face the nightstand. It is a simple piece of furniture, but it has become a shrine. Inside the top drawer lies his phone. It is a black, cold slab of glass and metal that contains the map of a life cut short. Every text, every blurry photo of a sunset, every half-finished grocery list, it's all trapped inside that silicon brain. To anyone else it's a piece of outdated tech, but to me it's a reliquary. They tell you that you need to let go. They say that keeping his belongings exactly where he left them is a way of refusing to heal. But they don't understand the terror of the battery hitting zero. I have this irrational, gnawing fear that if the charge dies, the last flicker of his consciousness, the digital echo of who he was, will finally vanish into the ether. So I keep it plugged in. I watch the little green bolt of lightning on the screen, a tiny, artificial pulse that keeps the memory of my brother on a digital life support machine. Tonight the weather feels wrong. A thick, oppressive fog has rolled in from the valley, swallowing the streetlights and turning the world outside my window into a gray, featureless void. It reminds me too much of the night of the accident. The police told me the river was high, the visibility was near zero, and the bridge just vanished into the mist. I sat on the edge of my bed and pulled the drawer open. The sound of wood sliding on wood felt deafening in the stillness. I picked up the phone. It was still smudged with the faint, oily swirls of his fingerprints from the last day he was alive. I held it in my palm, feeling its weight, and for a second I could almost smell his jacket, rainwater and old leather. I checked the messages again. The last thing he ever sent me was a mundane request to keep the porch light on because the fog was foggy as hell. I haven't turned that light off since the day of the funeral. It stays on, a lonely yellow beacon burning into the mist, a signal for a traveler who is never coming home. I laid his phone next to mine on the nightstand, two identical rectangles reflecting the dim light of my bedside lamp. I closed my eyes, trying to let the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen lull me into a sleep that never feels deep enough. I must have drifted off for a few minutes, that thin, transparent sleep where you are still aware of the shadows in the corner of the room. The air in the bedroom suddenly turned sharp and cold, the kind of cold that makes your lungs ache. Then the light changed. A piercing, artificial blue glow erupted from the nightstand, cutting through the dark like a blade. My heart didn't just speed up, it felt like it had been gripped by a frozen hand. I didn't have to look. I could feel the vibration through the mattress, a rhythmic, low-frequency thrum that rattled the glass of water on the table. My own phone was dark. The light was coming from his. I reached out, my fingers trembling so violently I could barely grasp the device. I pulled it close to my face, the brightness stinging my eyes. The caller ID didn't show a number. It didn't show a location. It simply said Big Brother. The time on the corner of the screen read 3:14 a.m. In the world of the occult, they call that the dead hour, the moment when the veil between what is and what was becomes thin enough to tear. My thumb hovered over the screen. I knew that answering this was a mistake. I knew that whatever was on the other end of this line couldn't be the man I buried. But the silence of the last 6 months had been so loud, so unbearable, that I would have walked into hell just to hear him say my name one more time. I swiped the green bar. I pressed the cold glass to my ear and held my breath. At first, there was only the sound of rushing water, a distant, muffled roar like a seashell held to the ear of a drowning man. Then a slow, wet sliding sound like something heavy being dragged through silt. Sarah? The voice was thin. It sounded like it was traveling across a vast, impossible distance, filtered through layers of earth and freezing water. It was his voice, but it was hollowed out, stripped of its warmth, leaving only a raw, desperate edge. Elias. I whispered, my voice breaking. Is this a joke? Who is this? I'm so cold, Sarah, the voice replied. There was a wetness to the words, a sound of liquid shifting in a throat that shouldn't be moving. The fog is so thick here. I can't find the bridge, but I can see your light. Why did you leave the porch light on? A cold sweat broke across my skin. My house is set back from the road, shielded by a dense line of trees. You can't see the porch light from the highway, and you certainly can't see it from the river where the car went down. Where are you? I asked, my hand clutching the phone so hard the plastic creaked. I'm at the gate, he whispered, and I could hear the sound of a heavy metal latch clicking on the other end of the line. I followed the signal. I'm 3 blocks away, Sarah. Just keep talking. If the line stays open, I can find the door. The blue light from the phone didn't just illuminate the room. It felt like it was ionizing the air, making every breath I took taste like ozone and old, stagnant water. I stared at the words Big Brother on the screen, and for a second, my mind simply refused to process the reality of it. It's a strange thing how the human brain tries to protect you. I found myself thinking about the phone plan. I wondered if the bill had been paid, if some server in a desert somewhere had glitched and sent a ghost signal. I looked at the glass of water on my nightstand, watching the surface ripple in time with the phone's vibration. Thrum, thrum, thrum. It was the heartbeat of a dead man. I finally reached out. My hand felt like it belonged to someone else, a heavy, clumsy thing that moved through the air with agonizing slowness. When my thumb swiped that green bar, the silence of the room was instantly murdered by the sound of the connection. It wasn't static. It wasn't a dial tone. It was the sound of a vast, open space, the kind of sound you hear when you stand on the edge of a canyon at night, where the wind has nowhere to go but down. Sarah? The voice hit me like a physical blow to the chest. It was Elias. It was his cadence, the way he lingered on this, the slight rasp he'd had ever since we were kids and he'd spent a whole summer screaming at a campsite. But it was wrong. It sounded like he was speaking through a layer of wet wool. There was a rhythmic, squelching sound behind his words, like someone pulling their boots out of deep, thick mud over and over again. Elias, I whispered. I couldn't even hear my own voice. It felt like the shadows in the corners of the room were leaning in, trying to catch his reply. Elias, this isn't funny. Whoever this is, if this is some kind of sick joke, I'm calling the police. The police can't find me, Sarah, the voice replied. There was a sudden, sharp intake of breath on the other end, a ragged, wet gasp that sounded like water being forced out of a pair of lungs. I've been walking for so long. The water, it's so heavy. It gets in your clothes, it gets in your hair. It never stops pulling. A cold sweat broke across the back of my neck. My mind went back to the bridge. I remembered the diver's report, how they said the current was so strong it had stripped the shoes right off his feet. I remembered the way the car looked when they hauled it up, filled with silt and river weed. Where are you? I asked, my voice rising into a jagged edge of panic. How are you calling me? I don't know how, he whispered. I just saw a light. I was in the dark, Sarah. It's so dark here that you forget you have a body. You forget your name. But then I felt a tug, like a hook in the center of my chest. I started walking toward the heat. I'm at the corner of Miller and 4th. The street lamp is flickering, Sarah. It's making a humming noise. It sounds like bees. My heart stopped. I live on the corner of Miller and 6th. He was 2 blocks away. I stood up, the phone pressed so hard against my ear that the plastic was beginning to ache against my bone. I walked toward the window, my bare feet silent on the hardwood. I reached for the heavy velvet curtains, the ones I'd kept closed for months because I couldn't stand to see the empty driveway. I can see your house now, the voice said. It was getting clearer, the wetness receding, replaced by a desperate, frantic energy. The porch light. It's so bright. It's the only thing in this whole gray world that has any color. Don't turn it off, Sarah. Please. If you turn it off, the road disappears. I'm crossing the street now. The fog is opening up for me. I peeled back the curtain just an inch. The fog outside was like a wall of white smoke, thick and impenetrable. The streetlights were just dim, sickly yellow bruises in the mist. I looked toward the intersection, my eyes straining until they began to water. And then I saw it. A shadow. Tall, thin, and unnaturally dark. It wasn't walking like a person. It moved with a strange, hitching gait, as if its limbs were being operated by invisible wires. It was drifting through the fog, its silhouette blurring and sharpening as it passed under the flickering light of the street lamp. It stopped. It stood perfectly still in the middle of the road, its head tilting up toward my window. I see you, the phone whispered. The voice wasn't coming from the earpiece anymore. It felt like it was coming from the air itself. I see the curtain moving. You're wearing the blue shirt, aren't you? The one we bought at the boardwalk. I let go of the curtain like it had turned into fire. I backed away, stumbling into the corner of the bed. I hadn't bought that shirt until 2 weeks after the funeral. I'd bought it because it was his favorite color. He couldn't know. He couldn't know. Sarah, open the door, he said. The wet, sliding sound was back, louder now and closer. It sounded like it was right outside the house. It's so cold out here. My skin is peeling away, Sarah. I need to come inside. I need to sit by the fire. Just one more minute. Just stay on the line. I looked down at the phone. A new notification had appeared, a red banner that seemed to bleed into the blue light of the screen. Big Brother is sharing his live location with you. I watched the red dot. It had left the road. It was moving across my lawn. It was moving at a dead run now, the icon vibrating as it accelerated toward the little blue dot that represented me. Then the sound started. From downstairs. A heavy, sodden thud against the front door. Thud, drip, thud. The sound of something heavy and soaked with water throwing itself against the wood. I'm at the door, Sarah. The phone screamed, the audio distorting into a screech of static and grief. Let me in. I can't feel my hands anymore. Let me in. I didn't move. I couldn't. I stood there in the center of the room, the phone still screaming static into the air, while the thudding on the front door echoed up through the floorboards. My mind was clawing for an exit, not a physical one, but a logical one. I needed a lie. I needed a reason why this was happening that didn't involve a dead man walking up my driveway. I've always been someone who trusts the math. I'm a student of facts, of evidence, of things you can touch and verify. And the fact was, Elias was dead. I had the death certificate in a folder in the kitchen. I had a receipt from the funeral home. Gravity and biology don't just take a night off because you're lonely. It's a hack, I whispered to the empty room. My voice sounded thin, like paper tearing. It's a high-level spoof. Someone got into his iCloud. Someone is using his GPS data from the night of the accident. I forced my legs to move. I went to my laptop on the desk, the screen lid heavy as lead. I opened it, the sudden white light of the browser feeling like a slap in the face. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type. I went to the carrier's website, my fingers fumbling over the keys as I tried to log into our family account. I needed to see the call logs. I needed to see a routing number from a server in overseas, something that proved this was just a cruel digital prank. But the log was empty. According to the carrier, Elias's line hadn't been used in 6 months. No outgoing calls. No data usage. Nothing. The thudding downstairs stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was a vacuum sucking the air out of my lungs. I stared at the Find My map on the phone. The red dot was stationary now. It was sitting directly on top of the blue dot. According to the satellites orbiting miles above the Earth, Elias and I were occupying the same square inch of space. Maybe it's the phone itself, I muttered, my thoughts racing, trying to find a foothold. Maybe the water damage caused a short circuit in the GPS chip. A localized glitch. I grabbed a pair of scissors from the desk. I wasn't thinking clearly. I wanted to cut the connection, to physically destroy the bridge he said I'd built. I picked up his phone, the glass still warm from the charge. I looked at the charging port, expecting to see corrosion or river silt or some physical sign of a malfunction. But the port was clean. It was unnaturally clean. No dust, no pocket lint. It looked like it had just come out of the box. Then the phone vibrated in my hand. Not a call. A text. I looked at the screen. It was a photo. I didn't want to open it. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to throw the phone out the window, to run out the back door and never look back. But I tapped the thumbnail. The photo was a selfie. It was grainy, low light, and distorted by the fog. It was taken from the perspective of someone standing on my front porch, looking through the narrow glass pane of the front door. In the reflection of the glass, I could see the yellow porch light I'd left on. And behind the glass, in the darkened hallway of my own home, was me. I could see the back of my own head. I could see the glow of my laptop screen on the desk. The photo had been taken 3 seconds ago. My blood turned to ice water. This wasn't a hack. A hacker can't take a photo from inside your own hallway unless they're... I dropped the phone. It hit the carpet with a dull thud, but the screen stayed on. It stayed on, showing me that image of my own back. I turned around slowly, my eyes fixed on the bedroom door. I had locked it, hadn't I? I always lock it. But as I stared at the wood, I saw something that made the logic finally, mercifully break. At the bottom of the door, a dark, shimmering liquid was beginning to seep through the crack. It wasn't oil. It wasn't blood. It was cold, brackish river water, smelling of salt and decay. And as it pooled on my carpet, I heard a sound from the other side of the door. It was a wet, heavy sliding noise, like someone was dragging a soaked carpet across the floor. And then a soft, rhythmic tapping. Not on the door. On the wall. Tap, tap, tap. The exact way Elias used to signal me when we were kids and we weren't supposed to be talking between our rooms. "I'm not in the phone anymore, Sarah," the voice whispered. It didn't come from the speaker. It came from the wood of the door itself. It was muffled, vibrating through the grain. "The battery is full. I don't need the bridge anymore. I'm home. Open the door so I can show you how deep it goes." I backed into the furthest corner of the room, clutching the scissors like they could protect me from a ghost. My skepticism was gone. There was no more math. There was only the sound of the water dripping on the other side of the wood, and the realization that the porch light hadn't been a beacon for him. It had been an invitation for whatever was wearing his voice. The laptop screen was still pulsing with that sterile white light, but it felt like a cold sun from a different galaxy. I couldn't look at the call logs anymore. The official truth was a lie, and the impossible truth was currently leaking under my bedroom door. I picked up the phone again. The glass felt unnaturally cold now, like I was holding a shard of ice carved from a frozen lake. My thumb swiped back to the Find My app. I needed to see that red dot. I needed to see it move back, to retreat, to tell me that the photo was a trick of the light and the water was just a burst pipe. But the anomaly had changed. The red dot representing Elias wasn't just overlapping mine anymore. It began to vibrate. It didn't move in a straight line. It started to jitter, dancing across the digital map of my neighborhood in impossible, jagged arcs. 1 second it was at the mailbox, the next it was in the center of the backyard, then it was back at the front door. It was moving faster than any human could run, faster than a car, faster than a bird. It was as if the GPS was trying to track something that existed in multiple places at once, or something that didn't occupy space the way we do. "It's just the signal bouncing," I whispered, my voice cracking, sounding like someone I didn't recognize. "The fog, the moisture in the air, it's interfering with the satellite pings." I tried to believe it. I tried to focus on the technicality of multipath interference, the way radio waves reflect off buildings and water. But as I watched, the red dot stopped jittering. It stabilized, and then it started to grow. On the screen, the little red circle began to expand, its radius widening until it covered my entire house, then the street, then the whole neighborhood. It wasn't a location anymore. It was an area of effect. Big Brother is everywhere. The phone seemed to scream without making a sound. I looked down at the floor. The water seeping under the door wasn't just a pool anymore. It was rising. It didn't follow the laws of gravity. It didn't flow to the lowest point of the room. It was climbing the baseboards, leaving a dark, salt-crusted stain on the wallpaper. The smell hit me then, not just the rot of the river, but something older. Something metallic and ancient, like a basement that hadn't been opened in 1,000 years. I backed away, my heels hitting the edge of the bed. I looked back at the phone. The GPS app had glitched out completely. The map of my town was gone. In its place was a void of gray pixels, and in the center of that void, a single string of coordinates appeared in a font I didn't recognize, sharp, angular, and blacker than the screen itself. I didn't need to look them up. I knew them. They were the coordinates of the bridge, the exact spot where the car hit the railing. "The water is the same everywhere, Sarah," his voice came again. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a resonance. It felt like the glass in my windows was vibrating with his words. "You think there's a here and a there. You think the river stays in the channel. But when you answer the call, you open the valve. You're not in your bedroom anymore. Look at the clock." I turned my head toward the wall. The digital clock on my desk, which should have been glowing red, was dead. The analog clock above the door, the one Elias gave me for my birthday, was moving. But the hands weren't spinning clockwise. They were vibrating in place, ticking back and forth between 3:14 and 3:15, a frantic, mechanical stutter that sounded like teeth chattering in the cold. The GPS dot on the phone turned from red to a deep, bruised purple. A message popped up, a system dialog box that looked like it was part of the OS, but the language was wrong. "Signal lost. Searching for host." Then the phone's camera light flickered on. The blinding white LED on the back of the device started to strobe, a rhythmic SOS that pulsed in time with the tapping on the wall. Tap, tap, tap. Pulse. Tap, tap, tap. Pulse. I dropped the phone, but it didn't fall to the carpet. It hovered for a fraction of a second, suspended in the thick, humid air of the room, before slamming into the wall next to the door. The screen shattered, but the light stayed on. Through the cracks in the glass, I could see the GPS map again. The red dot was gone. In its place was a live video feed. It was the camera from his phone, the phone that was currently smashed against my wall, but the image wasn't of my room. It was an image of me from the front. But I wasn't in my bedroom. In the video, I was standing on the bridge, the fog swirling around my head, the dark water of the river churning below my feet. I looked into the camera in the video and my eyes were empty holes filled with silt. "I found you, Sarah," the voice said, and this time the door handle didn't just turn. It disintegrated. The wood around the lock turned to mush, crumbling into wet pulp as the door began to swing inward. The silence that followed the door's disintegration wasn't empty. It was heavy, vibrating with the sudden, sharp scent of ozone and stagnant river water. I stood frozen, my back pressed against the cold plaster of the far wall, watching the wet pulp of what used to be my door settle into the rising pool on the carpet. My phone, the one Elias used to own, the one currently spider-webbed and stuck to the wall, went dark for a heartbeat. The strobe light died. The room plummeted into a darkness so thick I could feel it against my skin. Then the second call came. It didn't come from the phone on the wall. It came from my own phone, the one I had left on the bed. The ringtone was the default one, that bright, cheerful chime that usually meant a text from a friend or a work notification. In this room, surrounded by the smell of decay and the sound of phantom water, it sounded like a scream. I didn't want to look, but the screen was a beacon in the black. I crawled across the mattress, my knees sinking into the damp fabric, and looked down. The caller ID was different this time. It wasn't Big Brother. It was a string of numbers, my own phone number. I was calling myself. I answered. I didn't even think about it. The terror had reached a point where it had become a kind of cold, hollow curiosity. I pressed the phone to my ear, and the sound that came through was no longer distorted. There was no more static, no more rushing water. The voice was crystal clear. It was high definition. It was so sharp it felt like Elias was standing right behind me, his lips inches from my ear, speaking in that low, conspiratorial tone he used when we were sharing secrets under the covers as children. "Do you remember the summer at the lake, Sarah?" he asked. The voice was warm. It was human. It had that slight, familiar catch in the throat when he was about to laugh. "Do you remember the red bucket we found buried in the sand? The one with the rusted handle?" A sob broke out of my throat before I could stop it. "I remember," I choked out. "We found a silver dollar inside. You told me it was a pirate's soul." "I lied," the voice said, and I could hear the smile in his words. It was so real it was devastating. It wasn't a soul. It was just a coin. But I wanted you to believe in magic. I wanted the world to be bigger for you than it was for me. That's why I'm here now. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to bridge the gap. The gray place. It's not bad, Sarah. It's just quiet. It's a library where all the books are blank until someone remembers them." For a moment, the horror receded. The water on the floor didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like a familiar bath. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the tall, thin shadow in the street was just a trick of the fog and that my brother had found a way to reach back through the veil. "But it's so lonely," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Everyone here is holding a phone, Sarah. Millions of us. We're all waiting for the line to open. We're all waiting for someone on the other side to say, 'Hello,' so we can remember our own names. When you answered the first time, you gave me my name back. But I need more than a name now. I need a place to stay." The warmth in his voice didn't disappear, but it changed. It became predatory. "The water is rising because I'm pouring into you, Sarah. Every memory you have of me is a brick in the house I'm building in your head. Do you remember the time I broke my arm jumping off the porch? Remember the sound it made? The crack." As he said the word, a sharp, sickening snap echoed through the bedroom. Not from the phone, but from the darkness where the door used to be. "The connection is high fidelity now, isn't it?" the voice asked, chuckling. "I can hear your heart beating. It sounds like a drum in a cathedral. I'm so close, Sarah. I'm not in the hallway anymore. I'm in the memory of the hallway. I'm in the way you remember the smell of my old cologne. Can you smell it?" I inhaled, and the room was suddenly filled with the scent of sandalwood and cheap tobacco, the exact smell of his favorite jacket. "Now," he said, his voice becoming a command, "look at the bed. Look at the space right next to you." I turned my head. The indentation in the mattress was deep, as if someone heavy was sitting right beside me. The sheets were soaking wet, the water spreading out from a central point that was invisible to my eyes. "I'm almost all the way through," he whispered through the phone. "Just one more story. Tell me about the day I died. Tell me what you saw when they pulled the car out. If you say it out loud, the bridge is finished. If you say it, I can finally hang up." The amber warmth that had momentarily softened the room didn't just fade, it curdled. The air grew dense, the oxygen replaced by a thick, humid pressure that made every lungful feel like I was inhaling damp earth. I looked down at the phone in my hand, my own number still staring back at me, the call timer ticking upward into an impossible duration. Then the notification sound went off. It wasn't the usual soft chime. It was a jarring, discordant screech that tore through the silence of the bedroom. A banner appeared at the top of my screen, glowing with a violent, electric red. Proximity alert. Target is within 5 feet. My heart didn't just race, it stuttered, failing to find a rhythm. I was alone in this room. The door was a heap of wet pulp, the hallway was a void of shadow, and yet the phone, the cold, logical machine, was telling me that the entity was close enough to touch. I looked at the mattress again. The indentation was deeper now. The water wasn't just soaking the sheets. It was beginning to steam, a cold, gray vapor rising from the fabric as if something freezing was reacting to the heat of my own body. "I can't tell you that story," I whispered, my voice a jagged wreck. "I won't say it. If I say it, you aren't a memory anymore. You're a tenant." "You've already started the process, Sarah," the voice replied. It was so clear now that I could hear the wet click of his tongue against the roof of his mouth. "Every time you checked the GPS, you invited me closer. Every time you looked for a reason, you cleared a path. And now the circle is closing." I scrambled off the bed, my feet splashing into the dark pool on the floor. The water was ankle deep now, and it was swirling in a slow clockwise rotation around the center of the room. I grabbed my keys from the desk and my coat, acting on a primal animal instinct to get out, to find light, to find people, to find anything that wasn't this room. I didn't use the stairs. I couldn't. I could hear the sound of the house changing behind me, the walls groaning as if they were being squeezed by a giant hand. I climbed out the bedroom window, dropping onto the porch roof and sliding down into the wet grass of the lawn. The fog was a living thing. It didn't just hang in the air, it reached for me, cold fingers of mist curling around my ankles as I ran for my car. I didn't look back at the house. I knew that if I looked back, I'd see him standing in the window wearing my face. I drove. I didn't have a destination, I just needed speed. I drove through the empty streets of the town, the tires of my car splashing through puddles that felt deeper than they should be. I eventually saw the neon glow of a 24-hour diner, the Silver Spoon, sitting like a lonely island in the sea of white fog. It was filled with fluorescent light, the kind of harsh, clinical brightness that promises safety. I parked the car, leaving it running, and ran inside. The bell above the door chimed, a beautiful, normal sound. A waitress with a tired face and a name tag that read Margie looked up from the counter. There were 2 truck drivers in a booth at the back, their voices a low, comforting drone. "You okay, honey?" Margie asked, her eyes widening as she saw my soaked clothes and bare, mud-streaked feet. "You look like you've been through a shipwreck." I couldn't answer. I just slumped into a booth by the window, my chest heaving. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, intending to call the police, to call anyone. But the screen was already on. The map app was open. The blue dot was there, pulsing in the center of the diner. And the red dot? It wasn't at my house. It wasn't on the road. It was moving at a blur, a streak of red across the digital map, closing the 3-mile gap in a matter of seconds. Proximity alert. Target is within 100 feet. I looked out the window. The parking lot was empty save for my car. But then the payphone on the edge of the lot, a relic of a different era, began to ring. Its light flickered on, a sickly green glow in the mist. Proximity alert. Target is within 50 feet. The diner's bell chimed again. But the door didn't open. The bell just swung on its own, back and forth, as if someone invisible had walked through. The air in the diner, which had been warm and smelled of fried grease, suddenly turned sharp with the scent of river silt. My phone buzzed. A text message. "I'm outside the glass, Sarah. Look at the reflection." I looked at the dark window of the diner. In the reflection, I could see Margie at the counter. I could see the truck drivers. And sitting directly across from me in the booth, sitting in the seat that should have been empty, was a figure. It was wearing his favorite jacket, the one that smelled like sandalwood. But where the face should have been, there was only a churning vortex of gray water and shattered glass. I looked back at the actual seat. It was empty. But when I looked back at the reflection, the figure was leaning forward, reaching across the table with a hand that was white and wrinkled, as if it had been submerged for a lifetime. Proximity alert. Target is within 0 feet. The fluorescent humming of the diner was the only sound in the world, a sterile buzz that offered no protection against the rising tide of impossible dread. I looked from the empty vinyl seat across from me to the swirling, faceless vortex in the reflection of the glass, my mind a fractured record skipping on the same word. No, 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 no. Margie was still at the counter, polishing a glass that didn't look like it needed it. The truck drivers hadn't looked up. The entire diner was trapped in its own mundane reality, a safe, brightly lit bubble of people who had no idea that a dead man was reaching across a booth, trying to bridge the gap between their world and his. I stood up, my legs feeling like they might collapse under the weight of my own fear. I didn't want to look at the reflection again, so I didn't. I looked at the actual seat, which remained frustratingly, terrifyingly empty. The scent of river silt was stronger now, a physical presence that seemed to thicken the air and muffle the sound of the diner's vents. I turned and walked toward the door, my movements erratic and uncoordinated, like I was moving through waist-deep water. I burst back into the night. The bell chimed a violent, frantic greeting that I ignored. The fog in the parking lot was even thicker now, a damp gray shroud that seemed to be actively seeking out the heat of my body. The green glow of the payphone was the only target in the mist, a beacon of a connection I needed to understand. I walked toward it, my bare feet squelching in the muddy grass. The ringing of the payphone was a physical assault now, a harsh, mechanical screech that echoed off the damp asphalt and seemed to vibrate the metal shell of the booth. I reached for the receiver, my hand hesitating inches from the cold plastic. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to run, to get back into my car and drive until the gas ran out, but I knew I couldn't escape this. It wasn't a distance problem. It was a proximity problem, and the phone was the doorway he was using. I picked it up. The ringing stopped instantly, replaced by a sudden, jarring silence that was even more aggressive than the noise had been. I held the receiver to my ear, and for a few agonizing seconds, there was nothing but the sound of my own breathing, a ragged, terrified gasp that felt too loud in the dead stillness of the fog. "Sarah?" His voice was different this time. It was the clear, high-definition voice from the second call, but all the warmth was gone. It was stripped down, raw and desperate. It sounded like he was running, his breath coming in short, wet panting sounds, like a dog that had been chasing a car for miles. "Elias, stop," I whispered, my voice caught in my throat. "Please stop. You're at the cemetery. This is a prank. It has to be a prank. I told you, Sarah." "The library is empty," the voice replied, and I could hear a sound on the other end of the line, a rhythmic, scratching sound, like someone dragging long fingernails across a blackboard. "We only exist when you remember us. You keep trying to remember the way I looked, the way I sounded. But your memory is flawed. It's based on photographs and what you thought I was. You aren't remembering me. You're remembering a shadow of me. And that shadow isn't enough to fill a body." A new sound began to emanate from the receiver, a low-frequency thrum that made my teeth ache. It was the same sound of rushing water, but now it wasn't distant. It sounded like I was standing in the middle of the river, the current churning around my ankles, pulling at my clothes. "But I'm looking at you right now, Sarah," the voice said, dropping to a low, intimate whisper that felt like a secret meant for a lover. "I'm looking through the glass of the diner. I can see the blue of your shirt. I can see the tears on your cheeks. You know the best thing about being on this side? You don't have to wait for the details to be right. You just need one detail. One impossible thing that breaks your mind enough to let me slide through." My throat went dry. I was still wearing the blue shirt, the one I bought after the funeral. I looked toward the diner window, strains of my own reflection visible, distorted by the fog and the green glow of the payphone booth. I couldn't see him through the glass. I could only see the empty booth where I had been sitting. "Tell me about the necklace, Sarah," the voice commanded. "Tell me about the one I was wearing when I died." I tried to visualize it. Elias didn't wear necklaces. He hated jewelry. The only thing he ever wore was a rusted old dog tag he'd found in our grandfather's footlocker. But as I tried to say the words, as I tried to correct the mistake in the narrative, a sharp, searing pain erupted in the center of my chest. "I remember the dog tag," I choked out, the words feeling heavy and wrong in my mouth. "No," the voice said, and this time the chuckle was dark, wet, and ancient. "You don't, because I wasn't wearing it. You gave it to me for my birthday, remember? The dog tag. You ordered it from a website. It had my name and property of Sarah on it. You were always so protective of me." My blood turned to ice water. I did buy him that dog tag. I'd ordered it just a week before he died. It was supposed to be a surprise for his 25th birthday. It was sitting in my desk drawer, wrapped in blue tissue paper. Elias never even knew it existed. "If you know about the tag," I whispered, the impossibility of it finally crushing the last remnants of my denial. "Because I saw you buy it," the voice replied, and this time the sound came not from the receiver but from the fog itself. "I've been watching from the gray place, Sarah. I've been watching you mourn me. I've been watching you live your life. I've seen everything you think you've done in secret. I was there when you decided to keep my phone charged. I was there when you decided not to erase my voicemail. I've been waiting for you to realize that I'm not just a memory. I'm a witness." A new sound hit the receiver, a scream of static that was so loud I nearly dropped the phone. When it cleared, the voice was warped, layered, like dozens of people were speaking at once. "It's not enough to bridge the gap with memories," the impossible voice said. "Memories are just a photograph of a burning building. You can't feel the heat. You can't smell the smoke. I don't want to be remembered, Sarah. I want to be real. And the only way I can be real is if you give me your reality." I looked down at the payphone booth. The floorboards, which had been dry a moment ago, were now covered in a layer of dark, swirling river water. My feet were submerged to the ankles. Through the receiver, I heard the sound of a latch clicking, a heavy metal groan that echoed the sound of my front door breaking. "I'm not at the gateway anymore, Sarah," the impossible voice whispered, the sound now perfectly split between the earpiece and the air around me. "I'm looking through the reflection again. You gave me the impossible detail. The bridge is completed." The green light inside the booth didn't just flicker. It began to thrum at a frequency that made the very marrow of my bones ache. The receiver in my hand felt like it was growing hot, the plastic vibrating with the force of 1,000 different voices trying to scream through a single wire. I looked down at the water swirling around my ankles. It was thick now, clotted with river silt and bits of green weed that looked like drowned hair. It wasn't just rising, it was pulsing in time with the thumping in my chest. "The bridge isn't made of stone, Sarah," the voice said. It was no longer coming from the phone. It was coming from the air, the mist, the very molecules of the booth. "It's made of your attention. Every second you stay on the line, you're dragging me through the eye of the needle." I tried to pull my hand away, but the receiver was stuck. It felt like my skin had fused with the plastic, a terrifying grafting of biology and technology. I looked out through the glass of the booth toward the diner. The Silver Spoon looked like it was 100 miles away, its neon sign warping and stretching into a long, bloody smear against the fog. Inside, Margie was frozen mid-pour, the coffee suspended in a dark, motionless ribbon. The world had stopped, but the water was still moving. "Hang up," I gasped, the words bubbling in my throat like I was the one drowning. "I'm hanging up." "You can't," he whispered, and now the voice was right behind me, the cold breath of the river brushing against the back of my neck. "The connection isn't in the phone anymore. It's in your blood. I'm the white noise in your head. I'm the shadow you see in the corner of your eye when you're alone. I'm the silence you've been feeding for 6 months." Suddenly, the glass of the payphone booth began to crack. Not from a blow, but from the pressure of the fog outside. The mist was pushing in, turning into a solid, heavy weight. A single, long fracture snaked across the pane in front of me, and through the gap, the smell of the river became a physical assault. Rot, salt, and the cold, metallic scent of ancient deep-water trenches. The light in the booth turned from green to a bruised, violent purple. On the metal faceplate of the phone, the numbers began to bleed. The 3, the 1, the 4, they liquefied, dripping down the chrome in dark, oily streaks. I looked at my own hand. My veins were turning a dark, translucent blue, the same color as the GPS dot on the screen. "The veil is just a thought, Sarah," the voice boomed, now echoing with the power of a breaking dam. "And you've thought about me too much. You've kept the porch light on. You've kept the line open. You've given the abyss a name, and now it's coming to claim the face that goes with it." With a sound like a gunshot, the front pane of the booth shattered. The fog didn't just drift in. It roared, a tidal wave of gray vapor that knocked the breath from my lungs. In the center of the mist, standing where the air should be empty, was the silhouette. It was no longer a shadow. It was a hole in reality. I could see the dog tag I'd bought him hanging in the center of that darkness, glowing with a cold, internal light. The person wearing it wasn't my brother. It was a collection of every grief I'd ever felt, every nightmare I'd had since the funeral, stitched together by the sound of his voice. It reached out, and as its fingers, long, wet, and translucent, touched the glass of the booth, the diner behind me finally winked out. The neon sign died. The lights of the town vanished. There was only me, the phone booth, and the roaring water of a river that wasn't on any map. The roar of the river was no longer a sound. It was a vibration that lived inside my marrow. I stood in the skeleton of the shattered booth, the cold, brackish water now swirling at my waist. The world beyond the glass had ceased to exist. There was no diner, no parking lot, no highway. There was only the infinite gray void of the fog and the relentless, churning black water that smelled of ancient endings. The receiver was still fused to my hand, but it was silent now. The voices had retreated, leaving a vacuum that felt like it was pulling the very air from my lungs. I looked at the figure standing in the breach. It was less than a foot away. It didn't have a face. It had a memory of a face, a shifting liquid surface where Elias's eyes would momentarily form out of the silt before dissolving back into the gray. The dog tag I had never given him hung in the center of its chest, perfectly still despite the gale force wind of the abyss. It was the only solid thing left in the universe. The proximity is 0, Sarah, the voice said. It didn't come from the figure's mouth. It came from my own. My lips moved, but the sound was his, wet, hollow, and devastatingly clear. There is no more you. There is no more me. There is only the bridge. I looked down at the phone screen, the glass now completely pulverized. The GPS app was still running, but the map was gone. The blue dot and the red dot had merged into a single pulsing point of bruised violet light. The system notification at the top of the screen didn't say, searching, or connected, anymore. It said, integration complete. The figure reached out. Its fingers were long, pale, and wrinkled, like something that had been submerged in the deep for a century. It didn't grab me. It simply pressed its palm against my chest, right where my heart was trying to hammer its way out of my ribs. The cold was absolute. It wasn't just the absence of heat, it was the absence of life. I felt my memories beginning to drain away, the smell of the lake, the sound of his laughter, the weight of the phone in the nightstand. They were being pulled out of me, flowing into the silhouette like water through a sieve. As my memories left, the figure began to sharpen. Its skin took on color. Its eyes became solid. Its chest began to rise and fall with a breath it had stolen from me. I looked at my own hands. They were turning gray. My skin was becoming translucent, the edges of my body blurring into the fog. I was becoming the shadow. I was becoming the one standing in the street looking up at the window. Thank you for leaving the light on, Elias whispered, or I whispered. Our voices were indistinguishable now. I tried to scream, but all that came out was a mouthful of river water and a burst of digital static. The world tilted. The sensation of the booth vanished. I felt myself falling not down but out of reality, out of the light and into the gray library where the books are blank. The last thing I saw was the phone hitting the surface of the water. The screen flickered one last time, displaying a new notification. New device detected, Sarah. Then the battery hit 0. The light went out. The silence returned. And somewhere in a house 3 blocks away, a porch light finally flickered and died.